In this episode, we're talking with strata consultant Michael Tees, and we're going to explore the possible consequences of building a lot of apartments fast as we ramp up supply of new dwellings. The elephant in the room here is, are we doing strata right? Are we ready for a drastic increase in strata dwellings? Have we learnt from our mistakes of the past? And are there lessons we could and should be learning about best practice from around the world? Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, recently ranked number 5 in Australia out of over 18,000 brokers in the annual MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of an appropriate and experienced professional.
Our guest today is strata consultant Michael Tees. Michael has been in strata either as an academic, lawyer, manager or investor for 40 years and undertakes research on strata issues at the City Futures Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. I've listened to him on a number of podcasts and read his posts on LinkedIn, and he doesn't mince words, so we're looking forward to no holds barred chat on his worldview of strata and how what's happening overseas might play out in Australia. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. It's great to meet you.
You're very welcome. It's nice to be here.
Michael, we've done, I don't know how many episodes we've done, to be honest, a lot. Over 5 years we've been doing this. And, I think it's always good to get a worldview and to zoom out, really. I mean, we always think Australia's problems are unique. Even on the SMH today, it's the global problem with property. I mean, strata is we're not the only country in the world that, has multi-dwelling, options. How do we stack up? Like, where are we good? Where do we really, obviously tenancy rights and short leases is one, that might we not be great at, but where are we good? Where's really,
I think we're very good at strata. And I've had the fortune over the last couple of years of doing a lot of work in London and in Vancouver and in Spain, in particular, where I've met with people and discussed strata issues and met government officers. I even got the opportunity to speak at the House of Commons recently, where I was able to say to the parliamentary members, it was a cross-party group that were looking at introducing common hold in England, which is a form of strata. And I was able to point out to them the very good things that we've done in strata. But of course, no system is perfect, and strata has its problems. And I think in current times, there are really particular problems on a world view. We've got aging buildings everywhere. We've got building defects everywhere. We've got suboptimal building products that are being built into buildings. All around the world, people in the last 20 years had a light touch on building regulation. I say that with the exception of France and Germany. I was at a conference recently and the French and German academics couldn't understand all this nonsense about getting developers to do what they do. They just put them in jail. So that was a pretty good solution, and they were quite perplexed by why we didn't do that. Perhaps we should. That might be an idea for David Chandler, the building commissioner, who has got all the powers in the world, I think, except for the ability to jail someone. But I know he'd really like that power. It would suit him.
I think he would.
I'm sure he would. But he'd use it fairly.
Yeah. He's an interesting character, actually, David Chandler. And for anyone who doesn't know who he is the building commissioner in New South Wales. In fact, I think he's got another title now, doesn't he, Michael? But
his office has been extended and he's gone from like 12 employees to 400. So he's a very powerful man in New South Wales and doing some great things. I'm a big fan. I think when you have someone like him come along and try and clean up an industry, toes are going to get stepped on, egos are going to get bruised, and all of that is necessary to make important change. And he's done that. Some of the things he's done, some might query his methods, But, the evidence is there. And I can tell from my dealings with strata people and strata developers that people understand that the rules have changed in New South Wales, and near enough is not good enough anymore. We've got an enormous legacy of 20 years of badly built buildings that have to be fixed. But New South Wales is getting on with the job, and the rest of Australia is just twiddling their thumbs.
And that's an interesting thing too, because in New South Wales, we were the worst. Dr. Nicole Johnson wrote a report some years ago, and that just sort of skimmed the surface really, and by her own admission. But it was quite clear that New South Wales had the gold medal for the most amount of defects in buildings. But and whilst David is cleaning up the development side of things for future dwellings, like you said, there's a 20-year legacy of poorly built or poor construction. And recently there were reports of yet another building in Sydney deemed to be at risk of collapse.
Yes.
So can we expect to see more of this?
Yes, is the answer. David said on the 7:30 report last night that he had to start somewhere. He started with developers to get the biggest impact. But his strategy, or his office's strategy, is now to work through existing buildings and fix these problems. Now, it's harder when the developer has gone broke or been wound up or is dead. But we're getting to the stage now where I'm noticing a more intervention in the affairs and the decision-making of owners' corporations who may be in crisis, for example, Mascot Towers, or know that they have a problem and are doing nothing about it. And I think you'll see in the not too distant future more intervention by David's office, now that he has more people and more resources, into the affairs of owners' corporations who are struggling, either because they're dysfunctional or obstinate and belligerent, or just stupid and irresponsible. So he's got the powers to get involved and force people to do things. And I think it's important for listeners to understand that when we're talking about the repair and maintenance of strata buildings, this is a fundamental, strict obligation that is set out in the law. And the obligation rests on the owners of the building, that is, the individual members of the owners' corporation. The owners' corporation has the duty to repair and maintain property. So that makes living in an apartment fundamentally different to a house, where you have a choice whether you fix the subject, of course, to public nuisance. But, so long as you're not causing a public nuisance, you choose when you do your repairs and how you do them. In strata, that's not your choice. And that's one of the things that people don't get when they buy into strata, that when you share walls and floors and ceilings and facilities, there is a compromise. And the compromise is you don't get to say when you fix your things, you have to fix them. Immediately they fall into disrepair. And the other thing about this duty is that it extends to original defects caused by the developer and the builder. So in our state, in New South Wales and elsewhere in Australia, the obligation is to fix it first, and you can sue later if you like, if there's anyone to sue. But the obligation is to fix first. And that's something that I think that we don't speak enough about, and people buying into strata don't understand. It's part of the reason why strata is difficult.
Look, there are so many threads we could pick up from just that in this conversation. But one thing that really popped into my mind, which I'd never considered before, and that is the obligation is there for all strata owners for the life of the building, right? So say you buy into a building that's, say, 40 years old, they've got a history of raising low levies with low contributions to capital funds, the Capital Works Fund, and they've avoided, their obligations. So you've got, like you said, aging buildings. We have spoken with, I think it was Amanda Farmer we were talking about recently about the problem with aging buildings. You've got these aging buildings and they've got big cost items are starting to come up that they have to deal with. Do you think there would be ever a situation where individual past owners could be sued for their lack of attention in the past? Could there be a class action on this?
There could be, and that certainly happened in America like I'm thinking 20 odd years ago, there was a spate of litigation where people had taken action against those that had the duty to do something and didn't do it. One of the complications of that in Australia is we have a caveat emptor system, a buyer beware. And so when people do a search or should do a search, they have the ability to do a search. They also have the ability to inspect the records. And so I think that would probably negate that class action, because people would say, well, you knew what you were doing and you went ahead with the purchase anyway. So, we do have this responsibility on the purchaser. Now, that's very difficult because you can't, of course, unlike a house, you can't send a pest inspector or a building inspector out to see what's there. You can't pull the walls off a 30-story building and to try and discern what's there. So good books and records are important. Now, in most every building that I've ever had anything to do with, which is a lot, there's never adequate books and records, particularly about what was built. Developers, although they have the obligation to hand these things over, just haven't done it, and strata managers haven't insisted upon it. And so that's a problem. Again, David is addressing that in New South Wales by requiring those details to be handed before he gives an occupation certificate. There's no better time to get a developer to do something when they've finished the job. Their debt is
money.
The debt is at peak levels, and they haven't got their hands on the bucket of money. So that's a good initiative, and it will make a big difference for the people in the future. But for those, particularly with buildings built in the last 20 years, they have real problems knowing what they're dealing with.
Michael, in the States, UK, I think you said it's not too bad in France and Germany, but they got but have they got similar building issues? And, how are they attacking these problems? And is there anything we can learn from these countries?
Yeah, lots we can learn from America, because their schemes are bigger, and their laws are different. In America, the board has much more power to do things than a committee does in Australia. But the case, of course, that everyone's focusing on the moment is the Champlain Towers South Tower, which was built in 1981. It collapsed, I think, in 21 and killed something like 192 people. Now, there's inquiries going on there, as you'd imagine, and the exact cause of that has not been determined yet. But what has been determined is that the grand jury investigating that has made a finding that the owners corporation there, the board, knew about these problems from 1996, almost 25 years. A series of events occurred until such time as the ultimate tragedy. Now, the grand jury found that the repairs and maintenance were not being done on a regular basis. So it really is become the focal point for those of us working internationally on strata issues. And a lot of things have happened since that tragedy. The first thing that's happened is that the group of defendants and the net was cast very widely to include people working on the site next door, the lawyers for the association, the security company that didn't have a proper functioning warning system in the building, and $1 billion was collected from those people for compensation for those that lost lives and property. But a series of laws have been implemented. I think at last count, something like 18 states of the United States of America have introduced new laws as a consequence of that, requiring inspections, and the laws vary from state to state, but generally requiring inspections at the 10-year mark, the 20-year mark, the 30-year mark, which are independently done and then must be funded and done. Now, that is going to cause a catastrophic incidence of insolvency where people are just not going to be able to afford to do their repairs. So, watch this space for how that pans out. But the other thing, it's not just a statutory response. In America, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who are the mortgage insurers so when a bank lends to someone to buy a condo, they insure that loan. And if they won't insure the loan, then the banks won't lend to people buying a condo. So at an individual purchase level, the insurers of the banks are now insisting that there be quite extensive due diligence of the community or the owners association, including things like, give us a copy of the latest report. Have the repairs been funded? If the repairs haven't been funded, we're not giving you money. If people are not paying their levies on time, we're not giving you money. If the board's not functioning and meeting its KPIs and its obligations, we're not giving you money. So that is changing the way and changing the way people are behaving in a commercial way. So there's both a statutory response and a financial banking response that is driving change. Now, the impact of that, the real cost of that, where is that money coming from? It's going to come from owners. Where do owners get it from? Their savings. If they can't get it from their savings, what happens? In America, unlike Australia, a condominium board has the power to take your apartment off you if you don't pay and put it up for sale. So there's going to be a lot of blood shed and tears in America as a consequence of this. Will Australia follow? I think it will. I think there will be more intervention. There has to be, otherwise we can't be allowing people to die in buildings. And Veronica, as you mentioned, there's another, or I think at the moment there are 16 buildings with orders published on the Commissioner's website, which again is a very good thing. I think the naming and the shaming is a good thing. Now that some people are saying, well, that destroys value for those owners, and it probably does. But that's got to be balanced against safety and the protection of people's rights and resources when they buy in. You should be able to know these things as part of your inquiries about making a purchase.
Well, 100%, and it's been a real issue. It's quite difficult to do due diligence on a strata building anyway. There's a lot of opacity of information. There's a lot of confusion as to what information should be expected to be disclosed versus what is often disclosed. There's, as you mentioned, the record keeping is often not as good as it could be. And then you've got also the problem, yes, caveat emptor is great, but most, and I would say the lion's share, we're talking well over 90% of buyers, have no idea what they should be checking when they look at strata records. And so often they'll give it to their lawyer to check, and the lawyer sometimes will not check it, but sometimes will. And even then, unless they're using somebody who does a lot of work in the strata space, they're unlikely to get somebody who can give them any valuable commentary other than, oh, well, the sinking fund looks pretty healthy, which is often all you hear, right? So,
and often,
yeah. If we were to look at Mascot Towers, for example, that building was 12 years old when it started, or when it was found to be sinking. Obviously, it started sometime before then. And that's obviously a tragedy for each individual owner. And you mentioned about banks in the US and insurers of the loans starting to cotton onto this. Are banks in Australia starting to cotton onto this risk of lending in some buildings?
No, they're not. They're like rabbits in headlights. I mean, I can remember talking to the head of risk of Westpac. There it is. I've named them. At about the time of Grenfell, which of course, Lacrosse, which was about cladding. And I said, you guys have got a 25% exposure, but if you look at NAB, ANZ, Westpac, CommBank, they're equally, they've equally got equal exposures, I would have thought, to apartments around Australia. And there are thousands of buildings in Australia that still have combustible cladding on them. That is a real risk to life and safety of property. And they've just done nothing. They've just been completely and utterly. And so I think, sadly, it takes deaths to get action. And there is action in London because 82 people died in Grenfell, and there's action in Florida because I get the numbers wrong, but it's something like 192 died in Florida. We haven't had any deaths yet. And as a consequence, with the exception of New South Wales, which has done extraordinary work, both on cladding and on building defects and on changing building practices and micromanaging developers, there's been, a scattergun approach amongst the rest of the states, some of which is just laughable. And I can't for the life of me understand why we can't in this country, as mature policymakers and legislators, say, hey, gee, that guy over there has done something really smart. Let's copy that rather than reinventing the wheel. Or let's beat our chest and say, oh, we've got a better idea. I mean, it is really pathetic. And governments, when they do this, are playing with people's lives, and they're playing with people's financial and mental health. Strata is now affecting people's mental health in a way that we've never seen before. And that's a consequence of aging buildings, bad government regulation, and just the increasing complexity of what people have to deal with when they sit down as a committee to make decisions.
Michael, if the idea from the US, though, is 10 years, right? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you said the building has to have an independent.
There's a number of different regimes in different states. Some have gone with 20-year inspections or 30-year inspections.
Yeah.
But, the general principle is that there's a regime now where at a point in time in the future's life of the building, there has to be an independent study done. And that has to be then actioned and funded. We would have trouble in Australia even getting people to pay the fee of the person to do the independent study. I mean, these studies will be, $20,000 and $30,000 or $40,000 studies. We're not talking about, a $700 desktop report. So if and when these laws come, it will force a lot of good, but there will be a lot of.
Wouldn't that be great for the building? Like if you've got it'd be a bit of a, cross your fingers time, right? The Strata organise this, maybe there's a bit of dodginess in the Australian culture to do these reports dodgy as well. But the Strata company spends $40,000 on a report. It comes back squeaky clean or with some very minor defects, and there's trust in these reports. Then that's $40,000's been a great investment.
One of the things I'd like to see before I'm finished is a rating system for buildings. How good would it be to have a NABERS type system for buildings where you say, 128 Pennsylvania Drive has got 5 stars because its committee meets every quarter. There are good and robust debates. There's diversity. There's succession plans. There's, all these things that we expect of companies and not-for-profit organisations and government departments, which we don't yet expect of strata schemes. I wrote a book in 2015 about this very point, where I said, we have these expectations of, the Scout organisation and the golf club and the way people behave and the way they make decisions from a human rights point of view, from a financial point of view, and we don't expect that of the strata sector, which is controlling over $1 trillion worth of property in Australia and affecting the lives of 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people in a direct way.
It's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because if you do look at, say, commercial buildings, right? So you've got high-rise commercial buildings. Some of them are strated, but generally speaking, they're often owned by a single entity, and they'll employ facilities managers who, presumably have qualifications in this space. And they recognise that the building is an asset in itself.
That's
Whereas when you've got individual owners, they only think of their own unit as an asset. They're not necessarily thinking about the whole building. And certainly we read a lot of strata reports in our business. We buy property for investors and owner-occupiers in Sydney, and those buildings that are run like corporations, they're wonderful to read the records. They're wonderful, But the reality is that we have a problem that strata managers on the whole seem to be ill-equipped to manage complex structures, such as high-rise apartments, and executive committee members are unlikely to be skilled in this area. And there's still a pressure to keep levies low, which obviously can't help, And so you've got this sort of individual mentality contributing to really what needs a very different way of thinking. So I'm presuming that, you're suggesting that if you legislate for this, I mean, I think that you have to start with an acknowledgement.
Well, that's right. I mean, let me say a couple of things about that. I mean, at one time I owned some strata management companies, and I was also practicing law. So from 7 in the morning until lunchtime, I worked as a lawyer, and from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night, I worked as a strata manager. And in the morning, I was paid $700 an hour, and I was respected. In the afternoon, I was paid about $70 an hour, and I was disrespected. I even wore the same clothes. It was a really interesting time where you see that, owners don't value strata management work. Now, is that the fault of the owners or is that the fault of the strata managers? I spend a lot of time thinking about that and working on that problem. I think owners need a wake-up call, and one of the things that I'm big on at the moment is calling out owners who are just not facing up to their responsibilities as owners of property. And owners of a particular type of property are collectively managed property. Because there is this thing called an owner's corporation or a body corporate, these people think that this is some sort of mythical being that has a responsibility to solve their problems. They are the strata. They are the strata, and they are the problem. They own the problem. Mascot Towers is an interesting example. Great sympathy for the people of Mascot Towers that they bought a dud. But that's what they did. They bought a dud. And then they made some bad decisions about what to do with that. And that hasn't been featured much in the press, apart from some blogs that I've written, that call them out on this and say, look, after the evacuation, they went and borrowed something like $16 million on an unsecured basis at a very high interest rate and didn't fix the problem. Now, whose fault's that? Whose fault's that? That rests with them. They are 4.5 years in. They've never been united. They've never been. All the telltale signs are there. They chopped and changed advisors. They went down the path of going for a wind-up, which was never going to work. They were either badly advised or they got the right advice and chose not to take it. So we have to, as we sort of debate the future of strata in a pretty complex world, I think we have to really look at, the people with the responsibility and say, well, if you'd bought a unit and that had trebled in value because it was an exceptional buy, you're not lining up to give a third of your capital gain to the government saying, gee, that went better than I thought. Here's let me pay some additional tax, because I'm a winner. But when something goes wrong, there's gnashing of teeth and wailing. Now, as I say, Mascot Towers is a terribly sad situation, but you have to look at the reaction as well as the action. And the reaction of those people has been a textbook case in how to make your situation worse.
I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. And you can find out all about what I'm working on at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you'll find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program, access to suburb help for investors, or if you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or lower North Shore, you can connect with my team at Good Deeds Property Buyers.
If you're thinking about buying your first home, upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and importantly get the finance right. Please reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
Don't forget that you can download our free full or forecaster report. Which experts can you trust to get it right? theelephantintheroom.com.au.
I must read that blog actually because I haven't read it. And this is the thing though, that people assume it's easy to buy property. They assume that they only have to get the contract looked at, get a strata report, get their finance sorted, and it's all good, tick, tick, tick. That they don't take appropriate, or they don't approach it with the appropriate risk mitigation approaches, strategies. And then, like you say, they like to blame other people when it all goes wrong because that shouldn't have happened. And so that's life. That's unfortunately, people don't like taking responsibility. And this is what this podcast is all about. For those of you like to take responsibility for your decisions and make good decisions, the information would have been out there if anybody wanted to dig enough. They could. The red flags would have been there. I can't say categorically what information would have been there or not been there with Mascot Towers. However, I know I've read enough of the strata reports to know when there's stuff missing. When there's red flags and things that you should be going, oh, hang on a minute, this one doesn't smell good.
Well, I think with the exception of people who use buyer's agents, so if you buy an apartment in the traditional way where you go to a real estate agent who's being paid by the vendor and you expect that person to tell you what's going on, that's your first mistake. The second mistake is that they go then to a solicitor and screw the solicitor on the fee payable for the conveyance. Now, unless you're paying $2,000 or $3,000 for your conveyance, no solicitor is looking at your contract. That is being dealt with as a process, in paper shuffling and button pushing. No one's sitting down and telling you what you have bought. And even if they were to do that, sadly, most lawyers don't know enough about the intricacies of strata to be able to explain whether or not a sinking fund is adequate or whether or not the collective debt time outstanding is outside the norm, because there's very few people that understand those things. And then the strata inspection reports, have become 300 pages of photocopied material because the strata inspector is only being paid $200 to do it, and having been paid $200 to do it, all you can do really is take pictures of documents and bundle them together and serve them up. So the lawyer gets the 300-page report or the purchaser gets the 300-page report. No one reads it. And about, 3 people a day ring me and say, what's this about? And I'm not in the business of giving advice anymore, so I can't help them either. So, that whole system is broken, terribly broken.
I just want to add something in there. I would caution people just to assume that if you engage a buyer's agent, that they're going to do it, because the problem is there's a very low barrier to entry to becoming a buyer's agent. You go and do your licensing course, your Cert 4 and your diploma, and there is actually nothing in there about due diligence. There's very little about strata and nothing at all about due diligence. Yeah. So you could be getting a qualified buyer's agent who does not have the skills. So be very, very careful about that.
And so these are, but I've given lectures to people, and I've said, look, you're spending, if you're buying an apartment in Sydney, it's hard not to spend $1 million. You're spending, $1 million plus. Why would you nickel and dime people about advice as to whether or not this thing is what it seems to be?
Yep, 100%.
And then I've had people come up to me and say, oh, is the strata inspection report compulsory? No, it's not, but you're an idiot. So it's frustrating. But I do, I think if we are talking about cultural change in this sector, then we really need to be a little tougher on owners. And we need to be batting back a bit. And I'm starting to see in the chat group some strata managers. I'm in quite a spirited LinkedIn debate at the moment about the value proposition of strata managers. And really, there's some interesting stuff coming out there where, leading strata managers are saying, look, we've gone back and looked at buildings that, we've been managing for 20 years. And, the fees stayed the same. Well, in 20 years, on what planet? On what planet do you think that's a good thing when the number of laws that have been passed that put responsibility on people's increased? We have laws about window latches, we have laws about pool inspections and the like, and we're talking
but also
about
just general costs of doing business as well, costs. And wages, they've gone up in that time.
Property values of,
Yes.
doubled or then some.
More in
but
20
people
years.
trying to hold on to the strata management fee. Now, again, does that problem rest with owners? Does it rest with strata managers? I don't know, but it's got to be attacked. And for the 40 years that I've been involved in strata, strata managers and their various associations have been talking about this problem, but they have not fixed it. They have not fixed it. They have not come close to fixing it. So
Well, it's the shortage of dwellings in this country is probably going to force it to a head, because the fact is, and I know a lot of people will say, I don't want to buy strata because I don't want to pay levies, right? So there's this perception that the levies are just an added cost.
That's right. Yeah, they don't understand. That's like saying, I'm not going to buy a house because I don't want to have to pay to get the lawn mowed.
Yeah, I don't want to make repairs. I don't want to fix the roof if it leaks.
It is just so, I don't know, maybe it's about language. Maybe we shouldn't call it levies. Maybe we should call it, owner's fee.
Ongoing investment.
Yeah, or something. I don't know. But yeah, there is this crazy notion that, and I always sort of, make this point when I'm talking to strata managers, if you're a strata manager, don't put your logo on the levy notice. You wonder why these people think you're getting all the money. Well, you put your logo on it.
That's funny.
Don't do that. This is their bill for their property. So I think it's simple things like that make a difference.
So, Michael, you said the doing the regular sort of big reviews, independent reviews is one thing. I mean, an amazing portal where all the buildings got rated. I think that would be a bit of a nirvana, right? It's particularly that said, the developer, when it was built and then the developers all got ranked, and you could create some. But I mean, what other things are happening? I mean, what are the UK doing? I mean, what is some sort of low-hanging fruit that we should go? Is it really blacklisting buildings? I mean, should we be, strata owners, or if they hear about, strata managers, should strata managers be obligated to highlight the buildings that they're managing that are at extreme risk? I don't know. Where do you go?
I don't think we can put any more on strata managers. It's a tough job. They're not paid properly. They're hated. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, God, my strata manager did a great job. I'm going to ring them today and tell them they're fabulous. It just doesn't happen.
Same as property managers, really, isn't it?
I think, Chris, to your point about what do we do, blacklisting buildings, or I think that's what we're starting to see with the Building Commissioner in New South Wales having a list of buildings where, at least in relation to defects, that is being publicised. New Zealand has a much better system than us, where you can access reports, statutory reports about compliance of buildings, and it's free data. And that, of course, puts some consequences to the poor decisions of strata owners. If you say, no, I'm not getting a building safety report, or I'm not getting a work health and safety report, or I'm not getting an upgrade on this or that, that then shows up, and people can make some decisions, and market forces will drive better behaviour. So I think that's a system worth looking at. In England, the government there, particularly in relation to cladding and building safety issues, has taken a very hard line with developers, and basically wrote to them and said, if you don't fix your buildings, you will never build in London again. And it's just, it's just quite logical, really, when you think about it. And they've sort of even pierced the corporate veil. So they're not talking about, particular companies that are special purpose vehicles. They're looking at the guiding minds behind these companies and saying, listen, we don't care what vehicle you use to build your thing. We know it's part of your group. And if you don't fix this, and has produced a contract for them to sign, committing to fixing it. Now, that's a very logical step. In a way, David Chandler is doing that by calling in developers and making them accountable, but hasn't yet got that next step of saying, if you don't fix it, you won't build here again. So lots of things happening around the world. It would be good if we could pick some of those and implement them.
We talked about, you said don't put the requirement on the strata manager to basically declare whether the building is on the blacklist or not. But it could be material fact. I mean,
it is a material fact.
yeah. So, but in terms of property law, is it deemed as a material fact that needs to be disclosed to potential buyers?
Yes. Well, there's a statutory form that you purchase when you go to buy a unit, or you're given when you go to buy a unit. But that form is given by the owner's corporation. It's not given by the strata manager. The strata manager does that as a paid agent of the owner's corporation.
When is that given, though? Is that given during the settlement period?
It varies in different states. It can be given prior to contract, or it can be given after contract in different places. And you can also apply for an update of that statement prior to settlement. So, right. you should be getting an update of that step. But when you look at it, and I did a study on this a number of years ago, which I should pull out. When you look at the questions that the government pose in the statutory form, they're not the right questions. They're things that double up on the disclosure that you're getting from the vendor. What's the name of the owner's corporation? What lot number are you buying? What are the unit entitlements? Well, you get all of that elsewhere. The questions that should be asked are, is your building about to fall over? Can you have a dog? What are the rules about dogs? But more to the safety issues, there should be, do you know if you have any cladding? Not have you got cladding, but do you know? Have you asked the question? Have you asked the question? These are the really intelligent things that could be in a disclosure statement, and they're not, because it's just not been thought through.
But this is not a prescribed document in the contract to sale in New South Wales, so I'm presuming that it's part of the requisitions on title after exchange contracts. So it's a little bit late by then, because you can't get out of it if you don't like what you find.
It's the certificate that tells you whether your levies are up to date or not.
Right. Yes. Okay.
The people I forget what I don't do conveyance, never have. But I forget the name of the form. But it's that form.
Yes.
It's that form that is the opportunity for there to be real owners corporation disclosure. And my point, and I made this point to John Minns, the Strata Commissioner, recently. That form is low-hanging fruit. That form is a way of making owners corporations accountable for their own behaviour. If it's the owners corporation that is issuing the certificate, they've then got, it then has the burden. It's a separate legal entity. The owners corporation has the burden to disclose or not disclose these things. Then we could really start having some accountability when they don't disclose it.
But it's got to be disclosed prior to signing contract, though.
Or settled. Even if it was disclosed prior to settlement,
isn't that too late? Because you can't get out of it.
The answers may give an ability to rescind a contract, but in any event, yes, it's probably best to give it beforehand. But one of the things about Strata, and an academic recently wrote a paper about this, which I thought was great. Nobody really cares if owners don't do the right thing. There's no consequence for owners corporations. You've got to have a sinking fund report. Great. I'll get
many don't.
Yeah, I get my brother-in-law to do it on an Excel spreadsheet. He's a taxi driver, so he'll know heaps about it. There's no consequence for owners corporations, not other than for a lot owner to drag someone through to the NCAT or the VCAT or the QCAT, and that takes money and energy, but there's no real consequence for owners corporations that do the wrong thing, and that can't continue. So we need to find ways to make them accountable. Now the Strata Hub is a start in that direction. The Strata Hub in New South Wales is, I think, the foot in the door that will be used to require more information to be made publicly available about the inner workings of an owners corporation. So that's a good thing, but it's got a long way to go before it's providing things that are really useful. The disclosure statement is one that is a really easy thing for government to do, to say, well, listen, the people that are making the decision should be held accountable and forced to communicate. what decisions have been made.
The only final question I probably had on this is, do you think that, if we, rather than waiting for deaths, right, because deaths are going to obviously get people to take action, right? The government will take it serious if it's all over the front page, and they get some votes if they take action on it. But should we just try to, force people to lose money? I know you said that Mascot Tower is an example, right? But if we started blacklisting buildings and banks started not lending on blacklisted buildings or lending at a much lower LVR to protect themselves, then building values would drop for people who aren't taking care of their buildings, which would then increase again if they were taken off the registers. So, do you know, and the banks don't want to, obviously, because they obviously usually, but they might have low LVRs.
They don't want to
building,
devalue the book that's in that building already,
But if they think about it collectively, they go, well, the total loan on this building is 600 million and the building's worth 800 million, then we're probably still okay. We've got some with low LVRs. If we lose on that one, so I think do you think that finance is, because it sounds like America's doing something similar there. If you cut finance into buildings, you cut the values, and then people will start caring because they can't sell it.
Even in America, it's not actually the banks that's driving it. It's the insurers of the banks that are driving it. It's the insurers of the mortgage. It's the mortgage insurance industry that's driving it. Look, what you're talking about, Chris, is requires a lot of courage, and I don't see a lot of courage from Australian banks. Very true. I don't see it. I don't see it coming there. I was hopeful that on the cladding issue, strata insurance may have driven change, but it didn't, because all the strata insurers did was say, well, we insure you, but not for cladding. So they have taken the premium, but not the risk, and that risk still sits with the owners. So insurers haven't delivered it. Banks won't deliver it. I think we need to change culture in the same way that culture has been changed or is changing in the development sector. We need culture to change in the strata ownership sector, and that requires very strong leadership from government and industry.
One of David Chandler's initiatives was around sort of putting together a package to help or assist buildings to get rid of their inflammable cladding and replace it. But I understand the take-up of that
it's been pretty poor.
Very low. And from my understanding, that's because the owners they're still waiting for the government to kick it, to tip in the money. And it's like, well, you got to pay for it, guys. So, we'll help you. We'll give you some assistance here, but you still got to pay for it. So I cannot believe, I wouldn't sleep well at night if I was living in a building that had that on the outside.
Okay, I give this lecture, when you drive to when you drive to the airport, just look at all those shiny buildings in there. Yeah. And 1 square meter of that shiny stuff is the equivalent of 5.5 litres of petrol.
Jesus.
So just imagine a whole bunch of red petrol containers, 5 litre petrol containers stuck to the side of the building. Now, I'm not sleeping there.
God no.
Sleep there. I'm not having my tenants sleep there. I don't want members of my community sleeping there. But we haven't done anything because, and it just comes down to this one point. We could talk about cladding for another 45 minutes and more, but it comes down to this one point. The state, the federal government kicked the responsibility for that down to the states. The states have all reacted differently, but ultimately what they've done is they've kicked it down to the municipal councils, to the local authorities, and said, you guys go and do inspections and audits and tell people what they should do, without there being any funding for that. So, you've got 1 or 2 guys or girls or ladies or people or days in a local council responsible for this. They don't know what to do, and they're issuing or they're not issuing orders. Now, when someone dies, that officer is going to have a camera put in their face, and they're going to have to explain why they didn't do their job. And that's what cladding comes down to. We have not forced owners to remove the cladding, and the owners won't do it until they're forced to. They're not going to kick the can. They're not going to pass the hat around and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fixing a problem if until they're ordered to do so.
It's just
until they're ordered
astounding.
to do
So, we're going to ask you about your Dumbo in a moment. I suspect I wonder what that will be.
Yes.
But before we do that, at the beginning of this conversation, you did say that we're doing actually pretty well compared to the rest of the world. So then we've just talked about all the terrible things.
so. Yeah.
What? Just very quickly, what ways where's the hope?
Well, the hope is, and people like me study the worst cases. I spent 30 years practicing law, and no one comes to you and pays the fees that I was then charging to tell you their good news story. So, I think people like me and lawyers and academics and commentators, we see the worst of the worst. There's a whole bunch of people out there that have got good, strong community leadership within their buildings and are doing the best they can, and are solving problems every day and getting on with it. And there's the small minority. It's the same in the tuck shop, and it's the same at the golf club. 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and it's the same in well-functioning strata committees. So I think we do that well. We have a system which clearly defines responsibility, and that's better than some countries. We don't have the split system of freehold and leaseholders that is plaguing London at the moment. So I think there's a lot of structural things we do well. The way we protect investors to a certain extent from bad developer practices in setting up strata. So there's a lot of good things we do, and there are a lot of people that manage to get by. What I'm saying is that because of a whole range of world issues, like the environment, sustainability, aging of population, aging of buildings, inflationary pressures, interest rate pressures, and building defects. When we opened the borders to imports, we created we have thousands and thousands and thousands of building products coming into the country every day. Try to keep track of that and try to keep laws about the information about how that product's to be used and when it's to be used and when it's not to be used. It's all very difficult. So we have a really complex time for people to be looking after their own affairs, and further government intervention, I think is inevitable. But that comes at a cost to the taxpayer. And I think parallel with that, I'd like to see cultural change.
Got it.
It starts with these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, it's a really interesting, it's a very thought-provoking conversation. So do you have an example of a property Dumbo so we can wrap this up with a nice lesson that we could perhaps learn from somebody's...
I'll give the generic Dumbo.
Right.
The generic Dumbo, I think, is the person that spends a couple of $1 million on an apartment, but doesn't get the right advice from the right people and nickel and dimes people to get them to do a form filling process. When what they really need is considered opinion. I think that's the number one problem. They go in as lambs to the slaughter, and don't take enough effort. Now, there are steps you can take. You can look up ICERT development codes. You can look at, just Google your developer, Google your builder, have a look at the building commissioner's stop work orders. There are things that can be done and should be done by competent and well-advised purchasers that start the process, at least going in with your eyes open, and probably, stay away from anything that's not more than 20 years old. That might be the best solution.
Scary, isn't it? Right. we actually
I've disvalued your business.
Yeah. No, not at all.
You're preaching to the converted there, right? We have been talking about this for years and years, pre any issues in Mascot, all the way back to 2013, 14, etc. So we totally get that, and I think the challenge is
old strata.
The problem is the good buildings, the older ones, 20 years old, are starting to get out of reach for a lot of people. And, they're starting to have to make more and more compromises and locations. And, we're seeing some issues at the moment with LVRs, like postcode LVRs and good properties in good, in areas that have got high density are basically getting tarnished. Good buildings are getting tarnished by poor buildings. And so a blanket way is not really...
Dank Street, Sydney is a great example of that.
Which one?
Yeah.
Dank Street, the Dank Street developments, there's some great developments there that just get caught up in...
Agree.
And I might happen to own a unit in one of them. But it's a shame because, there's terrific buildings there that have been well looked after and are past their problem stage. They're in they're into their 20s and they've been through all of that and they've been fixed and well looked after.
Yeah, maybe technology will solve these things, right? Big data and all that, and maybe we can get some better answers. But I really appreciate the chat, Michael. And I think it's going to be a conversation that's ongoing, but it sounds like it is going slightly in the right direction. But
there's so many aspects to it. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, well, we would love to get you back at a future time to dig in some of those other aspects as well. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. Our listeners, I'm certain, will find this conversation fascinating. And, not to scare you off strata, it's just to be very, very discerning as to what you're buying.
Exactly.
Quick postscript for this episode. After we had finished filming and recording, Michael came back to us and said that he'd actually made an error in the amount of people that died in that apartment building collapse in Florida. He wanted to correct the record to say 98 people died. A terrible, terrible tragedy, but he did get the number wrong, so he wanted listeners to know that. Thanks for tuning in. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.